She sold her first night to a disabled billionaire to save her mother, but he did the unthinkable. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The night rain swept across the empty city like a sheet of silver threads. Streetlights blurred through the downpour, and the chill in the air felt sharper than glass. At the corner of Lexington Avenue, a young woman named Sophie Hale stood beneath a flickering pharmacy sign. Her cheap umbrella was broken, one rib bent upward like a twisted wing. In her hand, she clutched a white hospital envelope, her mother's surgery bill, $48,000, due tomorrow morning. Her fingers were numb, her shoes soaked through, but she did not move. She had spent all evening begging for an extension, pleading with the hospital administrator, even offering to clean floors just to buy more time. The answer was always, the same rules are rules. The world did not pause for desperation. A horn blared nearby as a black car swerved sharply to avoid a puddle. Sophie stepped back instinctively, pressing herself against the wet brick wall. Her reflection in the glass door beside her looked ghostly pale, eyes hollow with exhaustion. She whispered under her breath, "There has to be another way, Mom. There has to." Then she heard a sharp crash, metal scraping concrete. Across the street, a wheelchair had tipped over, spilling its occupant into the cold rain. A few pedestrians gasped but hurried away, unwilling to get involved. Without thinking, Sophie dropped her broken umbrella and ran. "Sir, hold on!" she shouted over the storm. Water splashed around her ankles as she knelt beside him. The man was in his mid-30s, his suit soaked, his breathing unsteady. His wheelchair lay a few feet away, one wheel spinning in the air. His left leg was braced in steel, and a faint scar traced down the side of his neck. "Please do not move," she said, brushing his wet hair from his face. He looked at her, dazed but calm, his eyes deep gray like the sky above them. "I am fine," he murmured. "Just help me sit up." Sophie slid her arms beneath his shoulders, struggling to lift him. He was heavier than he looked, but she managed to get him upright. "Your chair," she panted, dragging it back toward him. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the footrests and wiped away the mud. He studied her in silence for a moment, rain dripping from his lashes. "You did not have to stop," he said quietly. "No one else did." "I could not just walk away," she replied, voice shaking. "You are hurt." He gave a faint, crooked smile. "You sound like my nurse." Sophie glanced around. The street was nearly empty now. The bus stop canopy nearby offered a sliver of shelter. "Come on, let us get you out of the rain," she said, pushing his wheelchair under the awning. She pulled off her thin scarf, already damp, and tried to wipe his face dry. Her movements were awkward but gentle. "What is your name?" he asked, his tone low, almost curious. "Sophie," she said. "And you?" "Ethan." He paused, then added softly, "Ethan Cole." The name meant nothing to her. To her, he was just a stranger who needed help. But to the rest of New York, Ethan Cole was a man few would recognize without the flash of a headline, "A billionaire confined to a wheelchair after a tragic accident 3 years ago." "You should be more careful," she said. "The streets get slippery when it rains." He let out a quiet laugh, the sound carrying through the storm. "I will keep that in mind." Sophie glanced down at her own clothes, her thrift store coat clinging to her frame, her jeans soaked and torn at the knee. "Do you have someone I can call? Family? Friends?" He hesitated before replying. "No one who would answer this late." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The rain softened to a mist, and the world seemed to hold its breath. She could see the tired lines in his face, the quiet loneliness behind his steady gaze. Something about him felt familiar, the same kind of isolation she saw in hospital waiting rooms, in her own reflection. "I should go," she said, stepping back. "You are safe now." Ethan looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Wait," he said, reaching into his pocket. "You are soaked. Take my coat." "I cannot," she protested, shaking her head. "Please," he insisted. "It is the least I can do." He draped the heavy wool coat around her shoulders. It was warm, impossibly warm, carrying the faint scent of cedar and something expensive she could not name. For a brief moment, she forgot the cold. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded once, then turned his wheelchair toward the curb as a car pulled up, headlights cutting through the fog. A driver jumped out, rushing to help him inside. Before Sophie could speak again, the car door shut, and the vehicle disappeared down the street. She stood there under the buzzing streetlight, holding his coat close. In the pocket, her fingers brushed against something small and smooth, a business card sealed in a clear plastic sleeve. The embossed letters read, Ethan Cole, Chairman, Cole Industries. Her heart skipped. She looked up at the empty street where the car had vanished, the echo of his name still lingering in her mind. She had no idea that the man she helped tonight would soon change her life in ways she could never imagine. The next morning, the city woke under a dull gray sky. The streets still shimmered from last night's rain, and Sophie's small apartment smelled faintly of damp clothes and instant coffee. She sat at the edge of her bed, the wool coat still folded neatly beside her. She had hung it up to dry, but it looked too fine, too expensive for the cracked walls around her. The name on the card she found in the pocket, Ethan Cole, Chairman, Cole Industries, echoed in her mind. She turned it over again and again, tracing the embossed letters with her thumb. Cole Industries was everywhere. Billboards, tech devices, skyscrapers. She had walked past one of their offices just last week on her way to the hospital. The idea that the man she helped in the rain was the Ethan Cole felt unreal. Her mother's voice called weakly from the next room. Sophie? Did you talk to the doctor? Sophie set the card down and hurried to her mother's bedside. The apartment was barely larger than a motel room, and the medical equipment rented from the clinic took up most of the space. Her mother's skin looked pale under the thin blanket, her breathing shallow but steady. I will go again today, Sophie said softly, adjusting her mother's pillow. Do not worry, I will find a way. If you know, played it on. Her mother smiled faintly. You have been saying that for months. I mean it this time, Sophie whispered. Something might change. After feeding her mother and packing the hospital documents into her bag, she left for work. The diner where she worked the morning shift stood on the corner of 42nd Street, squeezed between a laundromat and a pawn shop. The neon sign buzzed, half of its letters dead. Inside, the smell of coffee and grease clung to everything. Sophie tied her apron and started clearing tables. Her manager, a tired woman named Carol, gave her a sympathetic glance. Your mom doing any better? Sophie shook her head. Not yet. I am trying to get the payment extended. Carol sighed. I wish I could give you an advance, honey. But business is slow. It is fine, Sophie said quietly. Thank you. It's say in medically. She worked through the morning rush, serving plates, refilling cups, smiling even when her legs ached. But her mind kept drifting back to the man in the wheelchair, to the way he had looked at her with calm, unreadable eyes. She wondered if he even remembered her. Maybe he was already on a flight to another country, his life far beyond the reach of someone like her. By noon, she finally got a break. She sat by the window with a cup of coffee she could barely afford and stared at the rain streaks on the glass. Then her phone buzzed. It was a message from the hospital. Final reminder, payment required by 6 p.m. to proceed with scheduled surgery. Her throat tightened. She had less than 6 hours. She pressed her palms together, whispering under her breath, Please, just one chance. Her eyes fell to the business card again, still tucked safely in her wallet. She hesitated. Could she really reach out to him? He was a billionaire. He owed her nothing. But the memory of his quiet gratitude last night stayed with her. Maybe he would remember. Maybe he would help. Her heart pounded as she dialed the number printed beneath his name. The line rang twice, then clicked. Cole Industries, good afternoon, a woman's professional voice answered. Sophie's voice trembled. Hello, I need to speak with Mr. Ethan Cole. It is important. I am sorry, the assistant replied politely. Mr. Cole does not take unsolicited calls. May I ask what this is regarding? Sophie's courage faltered. Just tell him it is Sophie, the girl from last night. He will understand. There was silence on the line. Then, please hold. She waited, staring at the clock above the diner counter. The seconds dragged. Finally, the voice returned. Mr. Cole asked for your location. Please do not move. A driver will pick you up within 30 minutes. Her hand went cold. Wait. What? I did not mean, but the line had already ended. Half an hour later, a sleek black car pulled up outside the diner. The driver stepped out, dressed in a suit that looked too sharp for this neighborhood. Miss Sophie Hale? She nodded slowly. Yes. Mr. Cole would like to see you. He opened the door. The city blurred past as they drove uptown, past glittering shops and glass towers that felt like another world. Sophie's fingers twisted nervously in her lap. She kept asking herself if this was a mistake. What would she even say? That she needed money? That she was desperate enough to beg? When the car stopped, she looked out the window and gasped. The building in front of her was vast glass walls rising into the clouds, the letters Coal Industries etched in silver above the entrance. Inside, everything gleamed marble white and gold. People in tailored suits hurried by, glancing curiously at her soaked sneakers and cheap coat. The elevator doors opened onto the top floor, where sunlight spilled through panoramic windows. And there he was, Ethan Cole, seated behind a wide oak desk, dressed in a dark suit, his wheelchair beside him. He looked up and his expression softened. Sophie, I hoped you would call. Her breath caught. You did? I wanted to thank you properly, he said. Not everyone would have stopped last night. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. I did not come for a thank you. He studied her face for a moment, reading the fear behind her eyes. Then tell me why you are here. Sophie reached into her bag and pulled out the hospital envelope. Her hands shook as she placed it on his desk. My mother needs surgery. I do not have the money. I have tried everything. I did not want to bother you, but I had no one else. Ethan leaned back in silence. Outside, the city skyline glittered, and for a long moment, all Sophie could hear was the faint hum of the air conditioner. Then quietly he said, You saved me last night, Sophie. Let me save her. She looked at him, unsure if she had heard him right, but the steady warmth in his eyes told her he meant every word. Sophie stared at Ethan across the wide glass desk, her mind struggling to catch up with his words. You want to help my mother? She asked softly, almost afraid to believe it. Yes, he replied simply. I owe you a debt, Sophie. You stopped in the rain when no one else did. That kind of compassion deserves to be answered. Her throat tightened. But I cannot accept money from a stranger, especially not from someone like you. It is a valid via process. Ethan's expression remained calm, but there was a trace of something deeper behind his eyes. Then do not think of it as charity. Think of it as a transaction. You gave me your time, your kindness, and your dignity last night. Let me return the favor in a way that matters. Sophie lowered her gaze. The envelope on the desk seemed to glow under the office lights, her entire life reduced to a thin sheet of paper. She wanted to say no. She wanted to walk away with her pride intact. But when she thought of her mother's fading breath and the beeping monitor by her bed, her resolve began to crumble. Her voice cracked as she spoke. If I take your help, how would I ever repay you? He leaned forward slightly. You already did. You reminded me that not everyone in this city has forgotten how to care. The silence that followed felt heavy, but not cold. Ethan pressed a button on his desk phone and said to his assistant, Contact Street Francis Hospital. I want the bill under my name immediately. Right away, Mr. Cole. Sophie covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. You cannot just, I can, he interrupted gently, and I will. She shook her head. I do not know what to say. Then do not say anything, he replied. Just promise me one thing, take care of your mother. That is all I ask. A moment later, his assistant entered with a folder. Ethan signed a single page, then handed Sophie a copy. It is done, he said quietly. The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Sophie's knees weakened. She gripped the back of a chair for balance, her tears falling freely now. Why are you doing this? He looked toward the window, where the skyline shimmered in the afternoon sun. Because once, someone saved me too, and I never got to thank her. The warmth in his tone sent a strange ache through her chest. She nodded, unable to speak, then whispered, Thank you, Ethan. Truly. Go, he said softly. Your mother needs you more than I do. That night, Sophie sat by her mother's hospital bed, holding her hand. The doctor had confirmed the payment and scheduled the operation at dawn. Her mother's eyes filled with tears when she heard the news. Who helped us? She asked weakly. Sophie hesitated, then smiled. A man I barely know. But maybe he is an angel. The surgery lasted 7 hours. Sophie waited in the hallway the entire time, clutching the coat Ethan had given her. Every time the door opened, her heart jumped. When the surgeon finally emerged, his expression was calm. The operation was successful, he said. Your mother will need time to recover, but she is going to be fine. contrited to op his end. Sophie nearly collapsed from relief. She covered her face with both hands and sobbed quietly, the weight of weeks of fear finally breaking loose. Days turned into weeks. Her mother's color returned, her smile brighter than Sophie had seen in months. But Sophie's thoughts kept drifting to Ethan Cole. She wanted to thank him again, properly this time, but every time she dialed his number, her courage failed her. One evening, as she walked home from the hospital, a sleek black car pulled up beside her. The same driver from before stepped out. "Miss Hale," he said, "Mr. Cole requests your presence at the foundation dinner tonight. He insisted I bring you personally." Sophie froze. "I do not have the right clothes. I cannot just walk into a place like that." The driver smiled politely. "Everything has been arranged. And also in der Sefen." 2 hours later, she stood in front of a mirror inside a dressing suite, hardly recognizing the woman staring back at her. Her hair was softly curled, her makeup light and graceful. The navy blue gown fit her perfectly, elegant but simple. She took a deep breath as the driver opened the limousine door. The ballroom was radiant crystal chandeliers, golden drapes, and the low hum of classical music. People in tuxedos and gowns mingled beneath the glow, champagne glasses in hand. Sophie felt out of place instantly, clutching the small purse the stylist had given her. Then she saw him. Ethan Cole sat near the front, speaking quietly with a group of guests. He looked composed, confident, the image of power and control. Yet when his eyes met hers, his expression softened. He wheeled himself toward her, stopping just a few feet away. "You came," he said, smiling faintly. "I almost did not," she admitted. "I do not belong here." "Neither do I," he said, his voice low enough for her to hear over the music. "Not anymore." Before she could reply, the host stepped onto the stage, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us at the Cole Industries Charity Gala. Tonight we celebrate not wealth but compassion, the heart of everything this foundation stands for." The spotlight swept across the room and landed on Ethan. And this year's guest of honor, the man whose recent donation saved a life at St. Francis Hospital, Mr. Ethan Cole. The applause filled the air. Sophie's heart stopped. Every head turned toward him, but Ethan's gaze remained fixed on her. He lifted his glass slightly, not to the crowd, but to her alone. And in that moment, Sophie finally understood his help had never been about guilt or pity. It was about something deeper. Something that had begun the moment she knelt beside him in the rain. But she did not know yet that this was only the beginning. The applause slowly faded, but Sophie could still feel her heart pounding in her chest. Ethan lowered his glass and gave her a small, knowing smile. The moment felt endless, suspended between gratitude and something she could not name. Then the crowd began to move again, people surrounding him, shaking his hand, praising his speech. Sophie stood at the edge of the ballroom, unsure if she should stay or disappear quietly into the night. Before she could decide, Ethan's assistant approached her. "Miss Hale," she said warmly, "Mr. Cole would like to see you in the garden terrace." Sophie followed through a set of glass doors that opened to a quiet courtyard lit by soft golden lights. The air was cool, carrying the scent of jasmine. Ethan waited near the fountain, the glow of the lamps catching the sharp lines of his face. "You look different tonight," he said gently. "Stronger." Sophie smiled nervously. "It is the dress. I am still me underneath." He shook his head. "No, it is not the dress. It is the way you stand now." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city lights flickered in the distance, reflections trembling on the surface of the fountain. Then Ethan broke the silence. "I wanted you here because I wanted you to see what your kindness created. The donation that saved your mother, it inspired others to give. We raised enough tonight to fund treatments for dozens of families who could not afford them." Sophie's eyes widened. "You mean this entire event started with you?" He finished softly. "One moment of compassion can set off a chain reaction, Sophie. You reminded me of that." Her throat tightened. "I do not know what to say." He smiled faintly. "Just promise you will not stop being that person. The world needs more of you." She looked down at her hands. "You make it sound easy." "It is not," he admitted. "But neither is learning to walk again." Sophie looked up sharply. His words hung between them, quiet and raw. He nodded toward his wheelchair. 3 years ago, after the accident, I stopped trying. I stopped believing anything good could happen to me. Until that night, you pulled me out of the rain." Her breath caught. "I did not do anything special." "You did," he said simply. You saw me as a person, not as a man who lost his strength. You gave me back something I thought I had lost. The wind brushed her hair across her face. She tucked it behind her ear and whispered, "Hope?" He smiled, his eyes softening. "Yes, hope." Dallas's haben my lawns from. They sat in silence for a while, the sound of water trickling in the fountain filling the space between them. Sophie could feel warmth spread through her chest, a strange mix of gratitude and something deeper, something she was not ready to name. Finally she rose. "I should go. My mother will worry if I am late." Ethan nodded but looked reluctant to let the moment end. "Before you go, may I ask you something?" She turned back. "Of course." He hesitated for a second, his tone gentler than before. "Would you consider working with me? At the Cole Foundation. We need people who understand struggle, people who care." Sophie blinked, startled. "Work for you? I do not have a degree. I have only ever waited tables." He smiled again. "Then you already have the two most important skills, patience and humanity. I will take care of the rest." Her heart fluttered. She wanted to say yes immediately, but she felt the weight of her mother's recovery, the fear of stepping into a world far bigger than her own. "Can I think about it?" "Of course," Ethan said. "But I hope you will say yes. The world is brighter with you in it." Sophie nodded slowly, her cheeks warm. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night, Sophie." As she walked back toward the street, she glanced over her shoulder once more. Ethan was still there, framed by the golden light of the terrace, watching her with an expression that carried both gratitude and quiet admiration. Sophie did not know where this new path would lead, but one thing was certain: her life had already changed forever. The following week, Sophie stood outside the glass doors of the Cole Foundation headquarters, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her plain blouse. The memory of Ethan's offer had replayed in her mind every day since the gala. Part of her had wanted to refuse, to hide in the safety of what she already knew. But another part, the part that remembered the look in his eyes, told her this was something she could not run from. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The lobby was bright and welcoming, lined with photos of community programs, hospital wings, and children smiling beside new playgrounds. The receptionist greeted her kindly and guided her toward the top floor. When the elevator opened, Ethan was waiting. He smiled the moment he saw her. "I am glad you came." Sophie nodded nervously. "I am still not sure I am qualified for anything here." Ethan gestured toward the large office space behind him, filled with young professionals typing on laptops. "You will not be behind a desk all day. I want you to work directly with the families we support. You have something they need understanding." She exhaled slowly, realizing he meant it. "All right," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "I will try." "Good," Ethan replied. "And Sophie, you do not need to try to impress anyone here. You already belong." Over the next few days, Sophie learned quickly. She helped organize donation drives, visited hospitals, and spoke with parents who reminded her of her own mother. Her natural warmth drew people in, and her honesty made them trust her. Every afternoon, Ethan would appear quietly beside her, asking how things were going. Sometimes he would offer advice, other times he would simply listen. One afternoon, as they sorted through files in his office, Sophie noticed a small photograph on his desk. It showed a younger Ethan standing beside a woman with the same gray eyes. "Is this your mother?" she asked softly. He looked at the picture for a long moment before answering. "Yes. She passed away not long after my accident. She was the one who taught me to give without counting the cost." Sophie felt a wave of sympathy. "I am sorry. She must have been proud of you." He smiled faintly. "She would have liked you." Their eyes met, and for a brief second, the world outside that office seemed to disappear. The air between them was calm but charged with an emotion neither dared to name. Then Ethan cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "There is something else I have been meaning to ask you," he said. "How is your mother?" Sophie brightened instantly. "She is recovering faster than the doctors expected. She even asked about you." "I am glad," he said sincerely. "Tell her she has a remarkable daughter. Well, mederations have a bronze in Mosgation." That evening, as Sophie left the building, she found Ethan waiting by the entrance. "Can I offer you a ride home?" he asked. She hesitated but nodded. The ride was quiet at first, the city lights flashing through the car windows. Then Ethan spoke, his tone soft. "You know, Sophie, people often assume I help others because I am trying to make up for something. The truth is, It is the only way I feel alive. She looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe that is what kindness really is, not about guilt, but about connection. He smiled, his eyes glimmering in the reflection of the passing lights. Exactly. When the car stopped in front of her apartment, Sophie turned to him. Thank you, Ethan, for everything. He shook his head. Do not thank me. Just keep doing what you do. That is thanks enough. In a member one had a grassly other Tamarinin. As she stepped out into the cool evening air, Ethan watched her walk toward the small building. He felt something stir deep inside, a quiet, undeniable pull he had not felt in years. And as Sophie looked back one last time, their eyes met through the car window. Neither of them said a word, but both knew that whatever had started in the rain that night was no longer just gratitude. It was becoming something real. Weeks passed, and Sophie settled into her new rhythm at the Cole Foundation. Every morning, she arrived early, carrying fresh coffee for the staff. Every afternoon, she visited hospitals and community centers, gathering stories of people whose lives the foundation had changed. Ethan often joined her on those visits. Though he moved in his wheelchair with quiet dignity, she could sense how much effort it took him to appear strong. One rainy afternoon, they stopped by a children's rehabilitation center the foundation sponsored. The sound of laughter echoed through the hallways as kids played on bright mats and chased toy cars across the floor. Ethan watched silently, his eyes reflecting a mix of pride and melancholy. Do you ever miss it? Sophie asked softly, walking beside him. Walking? Running? Everything I used to do without thinking? He smiled faintly. Every day, but I am learning to live with it. Sophie hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. You do more good sitting in that chair than most people do standing on their feet. He turned his gaze toward her, and for the first time, there was no guarded wall between them. You have a way of saying things that make pain sound like purpose. She looked down, embarrassed. I just say what I see. In rants. They spent the rest of the afternoon listening to the children's stories, taking pictures, and speaking with nurses. Before they left, one of the kids, a small boy with braces on his legs, handed Ethan a drawing. It showed a man in a wheelchair holding hands with a girl under a rainbow. That is you, the boy said proudly. And that is your friend. Ethan smiled. It is perfect. In the car ride back to the city, neither of them spoke for a while. The quiet between them was no longer awkward, it was comforting, almost intimate. Sophie watched the raindrops slide down the window, thinking of how strange life could be. One moment you are drowning in despair, and the next you are sitting beside someone who makes the world feel lighter. When they arrived at the Coal Industries building, Ethan turned to her before she could step out. Would you join me for dinner tonight? He asked. Not as my employee, but as my friend. Sophie froze for a second, caught off guard by his gentle tone. Dinner? He nodded. There is a small restaurant near the river. Quiet, good food, and no photographers. She smiled shyly. All right, as friends. That evening, the city was alive with lights, and the restaurant's large windows framed the shimmering skyline. The atmosphere was calm, filled with soft jazz and the sound of rain tapping against the glass. Ethan ordered for both of them, insisting she try the house soup and a dish she had never heard of before. They talked for hours about her childhood, his travels, their fears, and the strange way fate had crossed their paths. Every word felt natural, every silence felt safe. For the first time, Sophie saw not the billionaire, not the man in the wheelchair, but Ethan, the human being who carried pain quietly but never let it define him. When they left the restaurant, the rain had stopped. The street glistened under the moonlight. As they waited for the car, Sophie slipped slightly on the wet pavement. Ethan instinctively reached out, his hand catching hers. For a moment, time stopped. Her pulse quickened as their eyes met. His grip was steady, warm, alive. Careful, he murmured. I cannot rescue you the way you rescued me. She laughed softly. Maybe I do not need rescuing anymore. He held her gaze, a faint smile playing on his lips. Maybe neither of us does. The driver pulled up, and Sophie helped Ethan into the car. As she closed the door, her heart felt full and unfamiliar. Something inside her was changing, something that had nothing to do with debt or gratitude. When she got home, her mother noticed the glow in her face. You look happy, she said. Sophie hesitated, then smiled. I think I am, Mom. For the first time in a long while, I really am. And across the city, in his quiet penthouse, Ethan sat by the window, staring at the night sky. For the first time since his accident, he felt alive again. Not because of his wealth or power, but because of her. The next morning began like any other, but something in the air felt different. The Cole Foundation's office buzzed with quiet energy as reporters and photographers prepared for an upcoming press conference. Ethan was scheduled to announce a new medical fund, a project inspired by Sophie's mother's recovery. For Sophie, it was supposed to be a proud day, yet unease stirred in her stomach. As she entered the lobby, she noticed whispers spreading among the staff. Eyes followed her, curious and sharp. When she reached her desk, a coworker slid a newspaper across the surface. "You might want to see this," he said hesitantly. Sophie's heart dropped. On the front page was a photo of her and Ethan leaving the restaurant the night before. The headline read, "Disabled Billionaire's New Charity Assistant or New Girlfriend." Below it, paragraphs twisted their story into gossip. Words like affair and gold digger leapt off the page. Her hands shook as she read. "This is not true," she whispered. "This is not what happened." By the time she reached Ethan's office, he was already on the phone, his expression tight and unreadable. "I do not care what they print," he said sharply. "Shut it down." He ended the call and looked up at her. "I am sorry, Sophie. The media will twist anything to sell a story." Sophie's voice trembled. "Everyone here is looking at me like I did something wrong." "You did nothing wrong," Ethan said firmly. "This will blow over." But it did not. Within hours, online articles spread, filled with cruel comments. People accused her of using her mother's illness to get close to him. Donors began calling the foundation, asking questions. By evening, the board demanded a private meeting. Ethan tried to reassure her, but she saw the strain in his face. "You cannot let this hurt the foundation," she said quietly. "If resigning will fix things, I will do it." He shook his head. "No. I will not let you take the blame for something that is not your fault." Still, the pressure grew. That night, when Sophie returned home, her mother was sitting on the couch, holding her phone. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "I saw the news." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "It is all lies, Mom. I swear." Her mother reached for her hand. "I know, you do not have to explain, but maybe you should step back until things calm down." Axis. Sophie lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. Every good thing in her life seemed to be slipping away again. By morning, she made her decision. She arrived early at the foundation, long before the staff or press. Ethan was already there, reviewing documents for the event. When he saw her, his expression changed instantly. "Sophie, you look exhausted. Please do not let this—" She interrupted softly. "I am leaving, Ethan." His hands froze on the desk. "What?" "This scandal is hurting your reputation and the foundation's mission. I cannot be the reason your work suffers." He rolled closer in his chair, his voice low and rough. "You think I care about reputation? You think I built all this just to hide behind headlines?" She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "You care about helping people. That is who you are, and you cannot do that with me standing in your shadow." Make stract a second on a god. He looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to memorize her face. "Sophie, please, do not walk away because of lies." She smiled sadly. "I am walking away because of love." His breath caught. "Love?" Her voice broke. "You changed my life, Ethan. You gave my mother back to me. But the world will never understand what we have, and I cannot let them destroy what you built." She placed her badge on his desk and turned to leave. Ethan reached out instinctively, his hand brushing hers, but she gently pulled away. As the elevator doors closed, she saw him through the narrowing gap, sitting motionless in the center of that vast golden office, the man who once felt untouchable now looking heartbreakingly alone. And as the doors sealed shut, Sophie whispered to herself, "Maybe this is what kindness costs." Days turned into weeks, and the world around Sophie slowly quieted. The headlines faded, but the ache inside her did not. She returned to her small apartment and took a part-time job at a local clinic to cover her mother's medication. Every night when she walked past the glowing skyline, she caught sight of the coal industries tower in the distance. The light on the top floor still burned late into the night. She wondered if Ethan was there, alone in his office, still carrying the weight she had tried to take off his shoulders. At the foundation, things were not the same. Donations dropped, investors grew cautious, and employees whispered behind closed doors. Ethan attended every meeting, defending the mission, but even he could feel the shift. The board questioned his judgment, asking if emotions had clouded his leadership. Still, he refused to let anyone speak ill of Sophie. She was the best person we ever had, he told them, and the reason this place exists in the first place. One evening, he sat alone in his office, the city glowing beneath the glass windows. A photo sat on his desk, the drawing the little boy had given him, the one showing a man in a wheelchair and a girl standing beside him. He traced the outline of the two figures with his finger. Then his gaze shifted to a small folder labeled Community Fund Audit. It contained documents Sophie had once helped prepare: financial reports, expense notes, and donor receipts. Something caught his eye, a pattern that did not belong. The same name repeated across several large transfers: Nathan Cole, his younger brother. Ethan's jaw tightened. Nathan had managed a small charity division under the foundation, one that had recently reported missing funds. Ethan had dismissed the rumors before, trusting his family. But Sophie had mentioned an irregularity once, a number that did not add up. Back then, he had brushed it off. Now, looking closer, he realized she had been right. He picked up the phone and called his legal team. "I want a full audit on the Nathan Cole division," he said. "Do not alert anyone until I have the results." By morning, the truth surfaced. Nathan had been siphoning money from the foundation's accounts for months, laundering it through fake community projects. Worse, he had tipped off a journalist, feeding them the story about Ethan and Sophie to distract from his own fraud. Ethan felt a surge of cold anger, not for himself but for her. She had carried the shame of lies that were never hers to bear. That afternoon, he called the police. By sunset, Nathan Cole was in custody, his face splashed across the same newspapers that had once targeted Sophie. The truth spread fast. Sophie's name cleared at last. But for Ethan, vindication meant little without her there to see it. He sat in his wheelchair by the window, looking at the fading light. The city stretched before him, but it felt empty. He opened his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found her name. For a moment, he hesitated, then pressed call. Sophie was at the clinic, finishing paperwork when her phone buzzed. Seeing his name on the screen made her breath catch. She stepped outside into the cool evening air and answered softly, "Ethan?" "Hi, Sophie." His voice came, calm but heavy. "I thought you should hear it from me. The truth is out. It was Nathan. He framed you to protect himself." Sophie froze. "Oh my God. Ethan, I am so sorry." "Do not be sorry," he said. "You were right to walk away. I just wish I had believed you sooner." Her eyes filled with tears. "What will you do now?" He paused for a moment. "Make things right. Starting with you." Sophie said nothing, the sound of traffic filling the silence. Then, softly, he continued. "There is a community event tomorrow. The families you help, they will be there. I am dedicating the new health center in your mother's name. I would like you to come." Sophie's voice trembled. "Ethan, I do not know if I can face everyone after what happened." "You can," he said gently, "because they already know the truth, and they want to thank you." When the call ended, Sophie stood there for a long time, her heart pounding. The city lights shimmered around her like 1,000 tiny stars. After all the pain, all the loss, maybe this was her chance to start over this time. Standing beside him, not behind him. The next day dawned bright and clear, the first truly warm morning after weeks of rain. Sophie stood outside the new Cole Community Health Center, her hands trembling slightly as she looked up at the glass entrance. Above the door, in silver letters, was a name that made her breath catch: the Grace Hale Wing, dedicated to her mother. Crowds filled the courtyard: families, doctors, and reporters. The noise felt distant to Sophie until she saw him. Ethan waited near the stage, dressed in a dark suit, his wheelchair positioned in the sunlight. When their eyes met across the crowd, everything else disappeared. She walked toward him slowly, unsure if this was real. "You came," he said softly as she reached him. "I almost did not," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But you said they wanted to thank me. And my mother told me, running from good people never leads to peace." Ethan's lips curved into a gentle smile. "Your mother is a wise woman." 80 and to do. A staff member signaled that it was time for the ceremony. Ethan rolled forward to the podium as cameras clicked, but his eyes never left Sophie. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone steady and sincere. "This center stands for second chances. It was built not from wealth or influence, but from compassion. One woman reminded me that kindness can start anywhere, even in the rain on a lonely street. The crowd listened in silence as he continued. Her courage and heart inspired the foundation to grow beyond numbers, beyond headlines. Today, we honor her mother's recovery and the hope that now lives here for others. Applause swept through the courtyard. Sophie blinked back tears, her chest tight with emotion. Ethan turned toward her, raising his hand slightly. Sophie Hale, would you join me up here? Her heart pounded as she stepped onto the stage beside him. The sun caught the tears on her cheeks like glass. Ethan looked at her, his expression unguarded. You once told me that you could not accept help without a way to repay it, he said quietly, his voice carrying just enough for the audience to hear. You have repaid it 100 times over, but if you still feel you owe me something, then maybe, say yes. Sophie froze. Yes? She whispered, confused. Ethan smiled faintly. Yes to us. To whatever this is. To not letting fear or gossip decide our story. The crowd murmured in surprise, but no one spoke. The only sound was the wind rustling through the flags above them. Sophie stared at him, her tears now falling freely. Ethan, she breathed, you do not owe me this moment. I do not owe it, he said gently. I choose it. Sophie hesitated for only a second before she reached for his hand. The crowd erupted into applause as their fingers intertwined. She could feel the warmth of his skin, the steady strength behind his quiet smile. Later that afternoon, as the event ended and the crowd drifted away, Sophie and Ethan remained in the courtyard. The air smelled faintly of roses and rain. He turned his chair toward her and said softly, You know, I used to believe that strength meant never needing anyone, but you taught me that real strength is letting someone stand beside you. She smiled through her tears. And you taught me that kindness is not weakness, it is the beginning of everything good. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a familiar object, his coat from that first night. Folded neatly inside was the small business card she had once found. I kept it, he said, because that night was the start of my life again. In much of her habit, Sophie laughed softly, placing her hand over his. Then maybe it was the start of mine too. As the sun began to set, the city glowed gold around them. They stayed there for a long while. No longer billionaire and waitress. No longer rescuer and rescued, just two hearts that had found their way through pain to something pure and real. In that moment, Ethan looked up at the sky and whispered, You saved me, Sophie. She smiled, her eyes bright. No, Ethan. We saved each other.